I'm doing so much better than I was when I recorded the last video and the one before that. I don't want to jinx myself, but I feel like I'm really on top of this flare I was having. I'm really on the other side of it now. Oh, there's some wood. Touch wood. I'm going to talk more about that whole experience, what happened, and then specifically getting out of it, getting on top of this flare I was having. And I really honestly hesitated before I made that last video. I did not want to put something in people's heads that was going to complicate their recovery, their healing. But at the same time, it's really important for me to be transparent with this channel. And then the second thing is, there may be some of you that are at some point in your recovery and you've got something going on you can't quite figure out. You feel like you're hung up somewhere in, post-acute withdrawal, or you feel like you should be through withdrawal and there's something still happening, there's symptoms that are still happening. And one of the possible things is MCAS, and this thing I was talking about in the last video. Anyway, we're going to talk more about that in future videos. This one is about akathisia, specifically akathisia in an airplane. At the very minimum with this video, you can think to yourself, thank God I'm not that guy being described in this video, because it was unequivocally the worst moment of my life. Because I actually had to take 2 different planes and spend time in an airplane. What happened was this. I was on Cape Verde, an island nation, running a trip there, running a tour with my friend and business partner. And we had wrapped up the trip, and you needed to take a COVID test to leave the island. I tested positive for COVID. If you tested positive for COVID, there was a mandatory 10-day quarantine. So my friend, he was very kind. He waited back with me. We sent all of the clients tested negative. We sent everyone away. It was a great trip. But then I had to enter into this mandatory 10-day quarantine. I was taking benzodiazepines at the time. I was not in benzo withdrawal. I was not trying to stop taking benzodiazepines. This was about halfway through my benzo taking journey. This was in May 2021. And I was taking lorazepam, Ativan at the time, and I was taking it habitually, daily. I couldn't sleep without it. And I didn't think I had brought a supply with me that would last the trip, but I didn't bring enough to cover the trip, plus a 10-day quarantine, because I was not anticipating that. And instead of really stopping and looking at how many doses I had with me, I just continued taking them as normal and saw the supply kind of dwindling, but didn't think about what might possibly happen if I run out of them completely. I did not know anything about benzo withdrawal. I did not know anything about stopping these things cold turkey, any of the risks. Again, very stupid and foolish on my part. We get to the end of the 10-day quarantine. I go for my test, my COVID test. Before I even got the test results, once the 10 days were up, you were allowed to be out and about. So after 10 days of being inside of a hotel room, which, with the way my nervous system was at that time, if I didn't have the benzos with me, I probably would have been a wreck in there. But made it through that 10-day period, and then get released and proceeded to drink all afternoon while waiting for these test results. In fact, had a drinking session that went from Tarrafal in the north of the island of Santiago all the way down to Praia, stopping at all these little bars, having roadside caipirinhas, having shots of groggo with locals that were always so much fun. Too much fun, in fact. It was a fantastic day. Incredibly stupid, though, what I was doing. I had just gotten through this 10-day quarantine. Now I was drinking excessively, and I had no more Ativan, no more lorazepam to take later that day for the night or the next day. So eventually make it back to our hotel in Praia, and that next morning, there's people that talk about hangxiety. having this anxiety during a hangover. And all of this stuff, as I've said before on this channel, is just on a spectrum of neural activity, and anxiety is way over here. And then you have like seizures on the other end of that. And then you've got a whole list of awful things in between that obviously get progressively worse. So I had anxiety. That's, when I woke up, all those feelings of, feeling of disorientation, my heart was racing, my mind was racing. Had a guy email me recently. He said his mind was like a Formula One car. And he's been experiencing benzo withdrawal. And when he said that, my mind was like a Formula One car. I know exactly what he's talking about. In that particular moment, I was like, there's, this impending sense of doom, this just feeling horrifically physically, but a feeling so distinct and concrete that I was not going to get on a plane, not be able to go to the airport. But we had just spent 10 days extra in this place. We had finally got everything sorted with the flights. I did get my negative test result, and it's like, okay, we just have to do this, right? Just have to do this. I didn't notice the akathisia right away. I don't think it really kicked in right away. I was probably having, I was having withdrawal alcohol and the benzos, and it was just going to get worse throughout the day. Get to the airport, I'm already hanging by a thread when we're at the airport in Praia. I cannot really communicate with anyone at this point. I remember I was like often like holding myself, and I was like clenching, and like I was coughing. I was coughing a lot too. And that was, I think, just like an involuntary effort to rejig my vagus nerve. It was just some kind of something in my body. It was like a spasm almost that was happening. Just like, trying to just get my nervous system realigned as much as it could, but it was just not quite getting there. Every time, I'd cough or do something, and it was like trying to push this train back on the tracks, and every time it's just like, just hitting the rail and falling back down. And this just would get worse and worse. We get through security, which was a nightmare, immigration, everything was a nightmare. Every single second was an excruciating experience. Then we get into the waiting room, and now I'm starting to pace around. We're waiting by the gates. I'm pacing around everywhere. Can't really talk to anyone. My partner, my friend Matt, he's wondering, what the hell's going on. I can't really even explain it to him what's going on. He's like, you should lay down. He's like, why don't you have a seat, lay down on these benches? And that's the last thing I want to do. I couldn't even sit down. I never had akathisia before. I had no idea what was happening to me right now. There's people when they talk about things being it's all in your head, something else. Well, what about, you have something that happens, you don't even know what it is. You don't even know what the symptom is to be able to create it in your head. So yeah, there are some things that are real, that are physical, that are chemical, that are happening, and you have no control over it. Now there are things I would do if I experienced akathisia again. The clarity, knowing what it is, there are some tactics and techniques, different things, especially around breathing and stuff like that I would try to implement to mitigate the akathisia. But if you're in the middle of that storm, it's like I said the other day, it's like you're putting on your life jacket, your inner tube, whatever, and there's a tsunami coming for you. Anyway, we finally have to go board the plane. I was really dreading this. I was so many times thinking, well, what would happen if I just pulled the pin on this and we just canceled the trip, or I said I can't go. I don't feel well. I just had COVID, whatever, make something up. But then I was thinking, we just did this 10-day quarantine, finally free to go. I could get re-quarantined. I don't know what's going to happen, so I just have to get out of here. Get on the plane. It is a propeller plane. It's, smaller than, it's not the 737 that we came in and they're on. It's smaller than that. And immediately, we wait till be the last people on board, wait as long as possible before having to go inside this closed space, which I was so dreading. And finally we get on, and last person's aboard, and this plane just feels so cramped, claustrophobic. The air conditioning wasn't working when we got on as well. And they sit me down and they're like, here's your seat. I couldn't really, flight attendants were totally freaked out. They're like, what's going on with this guy? I couldn't really talk. And they put me next to this guy, and the guy straight away is like, what is wrong with this dude? So I was soaked through in sweat almost instantly. I'm twitching around in my seat. I can't sit still. So I'm just like, I'm holding myself and I'm twitching around, changing position. And not like once every 40 seconds or something. It's just constant. I am a complete mess. Of course, couldn't talk to the guy either. So, I couldn't even greet him when I sat down. So he's like, what's wrong with this guy? And he sticks around for about maybe 90 seconds. Then he's like, okay, I'm getting out of here. He goes and finds an empty seat somewhere else on the plane, which was a huge relief for me, at least having that open seat next to me. But still felt awful. And it was basically, it was white knuckling my way through that flight, an hour and a half. Absolute misery. Just absolute terror. There was everything from the anxiety of the flying itself, of being in this closed space, the physical symptoms, everything just compounding on itself. It was just kind of like, I don't know, like in terms of misery, psychic torture, physical distress, this was like neutron stars colliding with each other level of distress. But got through it, landed in Jakarta, which you'd think would be a huge relief, but then, it's having to go through immigration again, having to go get our bags, then having to recheck in, go back through immigration, go back through security, just to go back into a waiting area where we were going to have a 5-hour wait before our final flight from Dakar to Bamako. I'm not going to detail every minute of those 5 hours. I did survive it. I'm still here before you right now. Thought I was going to have to pull the pin on the trip probably about every 2 minutes, and constantly, I remember I was pacing around in the waiting area. I was holding myself and kind of like pacing around, and I kept seeing this sign on the wall that had like a heart with a lightning bolt through it kind of thing. It's like the sign for a defibrillator or something. And I'm just thinking like, I have to go to that first aid area. I didn't even know what I was going to explain to them, what was happening to me. I didn't know what was happening to me. I thought I was dying. I would have probably told them I'm dying. My heart's failing or something. I don't know. I've never felt this way before, and I think I'm dying. So I kept walking. I would see that sign. I'd walk past it, and I was coughing. I mean, if you saw me on the security camera, if you were working at that airport and saw me on the security camera, you'd be like, we need to go pick this guy up. Like, this guy's got like a bomb in his suitcase, or something is wrong with that guy walking around right now. Apparently no one watches those cameras in the Jakarta airport, because no one came and picked me up. Anyway, get through those 5 hours. I mean, I remember at one point I tried laying down. I think, I was physically exhausted. You could feel everything, my every single minuscule muscle in my body, everything was pushed to the brink. I was like, oh, I should probably lay down. Couldn't do it. I laid down. I remember contorting myself onto one of those weird airport benches where they have the armrests in weird places, so they're trying to prevent people from doing exactly what I want to do, lay down. And I remember squirming around for like 30 seconds and then having to get up, because I was like, oh, I'm going to die if I do this. If I stay in this position, I will die. So I got up and continued pacing. Couldn't eat anything. I had a few sips of water. My friend, my partner, he was like, my business partner, he was like, you should eat something. You haven't eaten anything all day. You should have something. I couldn't even, that idea, it was just not happening. It's not happening. I couldn't force myself. All I could do was just pace and pace and pace. Finally, it's time to board our final flight from Dakar to Bamako, I am coughing a lot at this point, and everybody's freaked out. Like, they don't even know I just had COVID, but COVID is on everyone's mind. This was May 2021. Dakar, Senegal was having a wave of COVID at the time. Cape Verde was having their big wave of COVID, probably why I got it. And I'm coughing as we need to board this plane. And, I've got a mask or whatever, but that doesn't really reassure people when you're coughing the way I was. It was pretty desperate, and Matt, even at this point, asked me, very considerately asked me, he's like, do you want to, should we cancel this? Like, can you make this flight? This is how much he was disturbed at what was going on. He's like, do you think you can fly? It was very apparent to him that something was really wrong. And I was very relieved when he asked that. I remember thinking, okay, because that was one of the worries, that messing up Matt's trip again. But, once he said that, it's like, okay, he's in theory on board with the idea of canceling this. I might have to cancel it. Might have to go to that first aid area. Might have to just go get myself checked into a hospital. But I just kept, also being like, man, the cost of it, part of it was the cost. We already had changed these flights once, and then gonna have to buy all new flights again. It was not a particularly profitable trip to begin with. We had all these, with our other business, we had all these struggles going on post-COVID. Hotel and restaurant business, not easy. And I was just thinking about the cost of things, and then, family waiting for me. And finally, it's just like, I have to just get through this, I have to get on this plane. Of course, as soon as I stepped foot on the plane, I remember fumbling around. I misplaced my boarding pass in between where they scan your boarding pass and you get on the plane. On the plane, with that Air Senegal flight, they automatically ask you again for your boarding pass. They make sure you have it again. Couldn't find it. So I'm like a complete mess, like looking through the same pocket 50 times over and over as the flight attendant stares at me like, for real? Like, what? Are we letting this guy on the plane? And finally find it and show it to her. But even during that time, I was just in a full-blown panic. I remember sweating again, sweat soaked through. Full-blown panic. Couldn't really talk. I have this cough. I'm thinking to myself, I should probably get off this plane. Something that just kept pushing me onto it. I guess it was the fear of the alternative. I don't know. Get on the plane. On that plane, thankfully, there were empty seats towards the back, and they wanted me there. They wanted me as far away from everyone as possible. Flight attendants, no one came near me during the flight. I didn't get served. I didn't want to get served, but I was like a leper back there. And as soon as they took the fasten seatbelt sign off, I kind of was getting up and walking around towards the back of the plane as much as I could, trying not to freak people out. And then when I was in the seat, when I had to be in the seat, I was just like squirming around, and thankfully I had a little bit of extra space. It was awful though. I think I didn't really it felt like I didn't catch a breath, for like 12 hours straight. That I didn't, obviously there was some oxygen going in my body because I survived it, but it was this gripping sense of terror, and then all the physical sensations that were going on, psychological terror, and this physical distress from every single cell of my body, just like screaming out, end this. It was like on the edge of, what it really was is probably being on the edge of a seizure. It felt like on the edge of death. It felt like it felt like this is not a survivable phenomenon. What I was going through, it's like this must feel like what it's like to be close to death. I feel like I'm on the edge of a catastrophe. My heart's going to give out or something on my brain. I'm going to have an aneurysm, something. It can't continue like this. It's totally unsustainable. And yet it was sustainable. Somehow I didn't die for 12 hours. It kept going and going and going. We got through that flight, and then straight away when we got off, I went and saw the guy who administers yellow fever shots. If you don't have a yellow fever certificate, he's in theory a doctor. And I was just like, I knew I was having a panic attack. I didn't know for everything else. And I was just desperate. I asked him if he had, I didn't know if it was going to calm down the akathisia, but I know on the anxiety side, a benzo would have calmed down that. And I desperately asked them if they had some kind of drugs. I would have thought they would have stocked, some kind of benzodiazepine at the airport as part of just an emergency, first aid medical supply. They did not. The guy, he looked at me like I was crazy. Everyone, including the immigration police, were like, okay, get this guy out of here. They stamped my passport. They didn't even ask me a single question. They got me through there. I ended up going straight to the hospital, straight to Golden Life, because once we got out of that airport, we made it through I thought before maybe the relief would come once we got through all the flights and everything. Once we got into the taxi, and it was, if anything, feeling somehow worse than I was before. I was like, this could finally be it now. Like, I might be checking out. And I was like, Matt, I have to go to the hospital. There's this Turkish hospital, Turkish American hospital. They part American shareholder, but we went there, and I had been there before already. I was very familiar. My daughter was born at that hospital, familiar with a lot of the staff there and everything, and just went straight to the emergency room. And that was its own nightmare. When they had to hold me down, basically 3 people having to hold me down in the emergency room to take my blood pressure and then administer an IV. Oh man. That was brief, but probably the worst moment of the whole thing. And then they gave me a titanic dose, a monster dose of Valium, directly administered into my veins with the IV. And I caught my breath for the first time in, I don't even know how many hours it was at that point. So, today, even if you're experiencing akathisia, I don't even want to say relieved, because I know how hard it is to find relief during akathisia. Be glad. I don't know what the word I want to use is. Just, you're not on an airplane with akathisia, or 2 airplanes with akathisia. And you're going to survive the akathisia, and it's going to start getting better. Man, that was rough. Of course, after this whole incident happened, I went back to taking benzodiazepines as normal. It wouldn't be until more than a year later that I stopped taking them for good. But that was my introduction to akathisia. It was much later that I learned what the term was. It was during benzo withdrawal that I learned what was happening to me. Just trying to get out of the sun a little bit. Absolutely beautiful morning here in rainy season Maui. Traveling today and actually going to be making our way to the States to visit family. First, we have a stopover for 2 days in Senegal, and then we'll continue on. Dreading this trip to the States a little bit for different reasons, but hopefully everything will be okay. I hope you guys are doing okay. Thank you for all the messages after the last video. I got a number of emails from people that were just really concerned, and I really appreciated that. Really appreciate that. Hear that thrush. I don't know if you can hear or not. African thrush. Very pretty call. It's like similar to a robin. I think it is a type of robin. Anyway, if you want to talk to me, you can email me at lifeafterbenzos@gmail.com. Hope to see you guys soon, and I hope you're doing okay.